The turpentine fumes usually calmed me, a familiar bite in the air that promised creation, order from chaos. Not today. Today, the scent felt like a chokehold, clinging to the back of my throat. My studio, usually a sanctuary of muted light and deliberate strokes, felt like a cage. The canvas on the easel stared back, an unfinished portrait of a woman with eyes too wide, too vacant. It was a reflection of something I couldn't quite name, a hollowness that had started to seep into my own gaze, staining my waking hours with a dull, persistent dread. My hands, usually steady, trembled. I tried to focus, to blend the ochre into the umber, but my thoughts skittered like mice in a dark attic. A tightness in my chest, a familiar knot, had been my constant companion for weeks, ever since the solicitor's first cryptic letter arrived. It spoke of estate matters and a formal reading. Words designed to sound professional, yet they vibrated with an unspoken weight, a promise of upheaval I felt deep in my bones. My grandmother, I hadn't seen her in decades, hadn't spoken to her since I was a boy, since it happened. Her death, when the solicitor finally confirmed it, didn't bring the release I might have expected. Instead, it felt like the turning of a key, unlocking a door I had spent a lifetime trying to brick shut. The call came on a Tuesday. I remember the specific ring, shrill and insistent, cutting through the quiet hum of my studio. My breath hitched. I picked up the receiver, my fingers slick against the cool plastic. "Mr. Dean," a voice dry as parchment crackled down the line. "This is the solicitor's office. Regarding my grandmother's estate, we've scheduled the reading of the will for Friday at 10. My presence is highly encouraged." Highly encouraged. The phrase hung in the air, weighted with an unspoken imperative. My studio, once a refuge, now felt like a holding cell. I couldn't paint, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. Friday arrived, dragging its feet like a reluctant prisoner. The solicitor's office was located in a building that seemed to have forgotten the passage of time, nestled between a dusty antiquarian bookshop and a perpetually closed tailor. The air inside smelled of old paper and furniture polish, thick and cloying. The solicitor, a man whose features were as sharp and unyielding as the creases in his suit, gestured me towards a heavy mahogany chair. He didn't offer condolences, only a stiff, formal nod. "Dean," he began, his voice devoid of warmth, "your grandmother, as you know, passed away last month. I am the executor of her estate." He tapped a thick folder on the desk, the sound echoing unnaturally loud in the silent room. "Her will is quite specific." He cleared his throat, adjusting his spectacles. "With the exception of a few minor bequests to distant acquaintances, the entirety of her estate, including all financial assets and properties, has been left to you, unconditionally." My mind reeled. Unconditionally. I hadn't expected anything. A token, maybe, a final act of appeasement or dismissal, but everything, Blackwood Manor. The very syllables seemed to taste of dust and decay, of secrets buried deep. My hands clenched, nails digging into my palms. I could feel the blood throb behind my eyes. I hadn't thought of that place in years, not consciously, but the memories, dormant for so long, stirred. "It's a rather unique property," the solicitor remarked, a faint, almost imperceptible curl of his lip betraying a hint of something unreadable. "Considerable grounds, remote location, needs significant work, I'm afraid. It's been vacant for some time, save for the occasional caretaker." He paused, flipping a page in the folder. "Your grandmother was a woman of singular interests. Her affairs were, at times, rather convoluted. I even came across a reference in her personal effects to a peculiar investigation she conducted years ago, something about a warden's office, files that shouldn't exist." He glanced at me, his gaze lingering a fraction too long, as if assessing my reaction to the strange phrase. "I imagine it's nothing. Just another of her eccentricities." Eccentricities. The word felt too light, too dismissive. My grandmother was more than eccentric. The deeds are here. It wasn't just a key to a house. It was a key to a past I had painstakingly locked away. The woman on the canvas, her eyes wide and vacant, flashed into my mind. I could almost hear the rustle of old lace, the faint, sweet smell of dried rose petals. Not legally binding, mind I, but stated quite clearly in a personal addendum. She requested that a certain item be left untouched in the manor. A doll, I believe she specified. The air thickened, heavy and suffocating. Leela, the name ripped through the carefully constructed walls of my sanity. My vision blurred. I could taste dust and something else, something metallic and old on my tongue. Leela. What had my grandmother done? leaving me this decaying monument to my childhood nightmare. And why? After all these years, was Leela still there? The gravel road to Blackwood Manor was a scarred, forgotten vein, swallowed by encroaching weeds and the greedy shadows of ancient oaks. The car's tires crunched a dirge, each revolution pulling me deeper into the past, into the one place I'd sworn I'd never return. The gates, wrought iron fangs rusted brown, stood ajar, a silent invitation to a waking nightmare. No caretaker had bothered to close them, or perhaps no caretaker remained. The air grew heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else, something metallic and old, like forgotten blood on tarnished silver. The house itself materialized through a veil of hanging moss and skeletal branches, a hulking Victorian edifice, once grand, now a decaying monument to neglect. Its paint, a faded, sickly green, peeled in long, curling strips, like skin sloughing off a corpse. Windows, dark and vacant, stared out like empty eye sockets, reflecting nothing but the oppressive sky. This wasn't just a house, it was a mausoleum, and I, the unwilling mourner, had finally arrived. I killed the engine. The sudden silence was deafening, a vacuum that seemed to suck the breath from my lungs. The only sound was the faint, rhythmic creak of a loose shutter somewhere high above, a ghostly heartbeat in the stillness. I sat there for a long moment, gripping the steering wheel, my grip tight. My resolve, so firm just hours ago, wavered. Every instinct screamed at me to turn the car around, to flee, to never look back. But the will, stubborn and foolish, held fast. I had to know, I had to face it. Stepping out, the ground felt strangely soft underfoot, a spongy carpet of decaying leaves, or perhaps as if something had just left. My breath hitched. I pushed the door open the rest of the way. It groaned, a deep, resonant sound that echoed through the cavernous foyer. Dust motes danced in the slivers of light that pierced the gloom, illuminated by some unseen window far above. The air inside was stagnant, thick with the cloying sweetness of potpourri long dead, mixed with the musty odor of ancient upholstery and something else, something sharp, like old iron and dried flowers. My throat tightened. Tapestries, heavy with dust, hung like forgotten shrouds on the walls, depicting scenes I couldn't quite discern in the dim light. My grandmother's taste, I remembered, had always leaned towards the morbidly ornate. I walked slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick, dust-laden rugs. I ran a hand over a nearby side table, its surface gritty with years of accumulated grime. Beneath my fingers, I felt the faint, raised pattern of carved wood, a familiar, unsettling texture. It was a table that had stood in the same spot since I was a child. As I moved deeper into the house, passing through a formal sitting room filled with shrouded furniture, then into a dining room where a massive, cobweb-draped chandelier hung like a dead spider, the feeling of being watched intensified. It wasn't just the house itself that felt alive. It was something in it. Nothing. I found myself in a long, narrow corridor I didn't remember. It was tucked away behind the main kitchen, a place I'd never explored as a boy. The walls were unadorned, bare plaster that was cracked and peeling, a stark contrast to the opulence of the main rooms. This part of the house felt utilitarian, almost institutional. At the very end of the corridor, partially obscured by a heavy velvet curtain that had fallen from its rod, I saw a door. It was made of solid oak, much sturdier than any other door in the house, and bore a tarnished brass plaque. I reached out, my fingers trembling slightly as I brushed away the dust. The words etched into the brass were faint but legible: Warden's Office. Warden's Office? What on earth was a warden's office doing in my grandmother's house? My mind raced, trying to reconcile the image of my eccentric, reclusive grandmother with a title that evoked images of prisons or some kind of custodial institution. I pushed the door open. It swung inward with a groan, revealing a small, stark room. A heavy wooden desk dominated the space, covered in stacks of yellowed papers. Filing cabinets, gray and imposing, lined one wall, their drawers slightly ajar. A single bare bulb hung from the ceiling, its dusty surface coated in cobwebs, offering no illumination. I fumbled for a light switch, found one and flipped it. The room remained shrouded in gloom, save for the faint light spilling in from the corridor. The desk was littered with ledgers, their pages filled with precise, looping script. Names, dates, strange numerical sequences. My gaze fell upon a particular stack of folders, bound with brittle string. They were thicker than the others, and the labels, written in a hand I recognized as my grandmother's, sent a fresh wave of ice through me. Case 73, Leela, Project Chimera. Subject, Dean. My breath caught in my throat. I reached for the folder labeled Subject, Dean, my fingers fumbling with the dusty string. What kind of files were these? And why, in God's name? Were they here, in a warden's office, among what looked like records of something far more sinister than household accounts? These were files that shouldn't exist. What secrets had my grandmother been keeping, buried in this forgotten corner of her decaying mansion? My fingers, numb and clumsy, snagged on the dusty string binding the file. Subject, Dean. The words felt like ice against my skin, even through the thin paper. What kind of subject? My breath hitched. A dry gasp caught in the stale air of the warden's office. Files that shouldn't exist. This wasn't some musty attic discovery, a forgotten tax receipt, or a faded photograph. This was an investigation, a record of me. A cold dread seeped into my bones, a chill deeper than the mansion's pervasive damp. I wanted to rip the string, tear open the folder, devour whatever damning truths lay within. But another part of me, a primal, terrified instinct, recoiled. Some secrets are better left undisturbed, especially when they wear my own name. The paper felt heavy, like it held the weight of years of unspoken accusations. My gaze darted around the small, windowless room, the rows of metal filing cabinets looming like silent sentinels. Each drawer, each label, hinted at a world I never knew existed within these walls, a world my grandmother had carefully, meticulously constructed. The air grew thick, pressing in on me. It wasn't just dust. It was the scent of old paper, of forgotten lives, of something acrid and metallic like dried rust. My stomach clenched. I could feel the faint tremor starting in my hands, a familiar precursor to panic. I couldn't open it, not yet, not here in this suffocating space surrounded by the ghosts of unknown documentation. I needed air. I needed distance. I needed to pretend for just a moment longer that this wasn't happening. I carefully, almost reverently, placed the file back into its slot, pushing it just far enough so the subject, Dean label was hidden. It felt like burying a small, dangerous animal. My legs felt like lead as I backed out of the office, the door creaking shut with a sound that seemed to echo for too long. The hallway, though equally dark, felt like a release. The files had shaken me, but a new, more insistent prickle of unease began to surface. It wasn't about the what in the files, but the where. Why had my grandmother kept this office? Why the meticulous records? The questions gnawed at me, but a different, more powerful compulsion was pulling me now. I found myself drifting towards the mansion's third floor, a place I'd avoided since childhood. The attic. My grandmother had kept a formidable collection of curiosities in that space, an assortment of forgotten treasures and discarded junk. I remembered being explicitly forbidden to go there as a child, a rule I'd only broken once. The staircase groaned under my weight, each step a protest against my intrusion. Dust motes danced in the sparse light filtering through a grimy skylight. At the top, a heavy, bolted door stood sentinel. The bolt was stiff, corroded with age, but with a grunt and a twist, it scraped open. A wave of musty air, laden with the scent of aged wood and forgotten fabric, washed over me. Furniture shrouded like specters stood in silent rows. Trunks, their leather cracked and peeling, were stacked haphazardly. My gaze swept across the jumbled landscape, searching. I didn't know what I was looking for, not consciously, but a deep, unsettling intuition guided me. Then I saw it. A small wooden rocking horse, its paint chipped, nestled against a forgotten cedar chest in a corner. And beside it, partially obscured by a yellowed lace shawl, was a hatbox. It wasn't just any hatbox. It was intricately painted with faded roses and tied with a ribbon that had once been crimson. A shiver traced its way down my spine. I knew that hatbox. I hadn't seen it in decades, but the image was as clear as if it were yesterday. My breath caught. My feet moved without conscious command, carrying me across the creaking floorboards. Each step was deliberate, heavy. As I reached the box, a wave of nausea washed over me. I knelt, my knees protesting against the splintered wood. My fingers, trembling violently now, reached for the ribbon. It felt dry, brittle like ancient skin. I fumbled with the knot, my mind screaming at me to stop, to turn away, to run, but I couldn't. It was an impossible gravitational pull. The lid lifted with a soft sigh of displaced air, and there he was, Leela. Her glass eyes, a startling, unnerving shade of blue, stared up at me from the nest of yellowed silk. The painted smile on her lips seemed wider, more knowing than I remembered. He was smaller than the monster in my memories, yet infinitely more terrifying. A sudden sharp ache pierced my temples. The attic air grew heavy, thick with the scent of dust and something else, something metallic and sweet like old blood. My vision blurred at the edges. A flicker of an image, a small hand not mine reaching out. It wasn't just a doll, it never was. The scent of lavender and decay. A child's muffled scream cut short. The memories weren't clear, not fully formed, but they were there. A jumbled mess of fear and confusion, all centered on her. My hands, still hovering over the box, began to shake uncontrollably. My jaw ached. I wanted to close the lid, to bury her again, to pretend this wasn't real. But those eyes, those unsettling blue eyes, held me captive. He was here. After all these years, after all the nightmares, after all the therapists and the medication and the desperate attempts to forget. He was here in my grandmother's house, waiting. It was a knowing, malevolent smirk. How could she be here? What did she do in all those years, locked away in this forgotten place? What had my grandmother been hiding? This was unthinkable. A cold dread, sharper than anything I'd felt before, began to spread through my chest, constricting my lungs. I pulled the string loose, the knot crumbling into a fine powder that clung to my fingertips. The cover, a thick, brittle cardstock, creaked as I opened it. Inside, the pages were yellowed and brittle, filled with spideways of faded ink. Not neat, typed reports, but cramped, looping handwriting, sometimes crossing out previous entries, sometimes scrawled in margins. It wasn't a dossier, not exactly. It was more like a journal. The first page dated back to my early childhood. My name, repeated in observations. Subject exhibits unusual attachment to the object. The object appears to respond to the subject's emotional states. Incidents of localized phenomena intensify around the subject. My eyes darted across the pages, searching for context, for an explanation. There were mentions of auditory hallucinations, displaced objects, and unexplained temperature drops. These weren't clinical terms from a medical professional, but the alarmed notes of someone observing something they couldn't comprehend. Someone afraid. A shiver, not from the cold, ran down my spine. This wasn't just about Leela. This was about me. The file suggested I was either the cause or a catalyst, or perhaps both. It detailed strange events in the old house, events I'd long since buried, convinced they were nightmares. The warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, was a repository of my forgotten fears, laid bare in disturbing detail. Then I saw it. A crude sketch tucked between two pages, drawn with a shaky hand. It was Leela, unmistakable. Her wide, vacant eyes, the faded floral dress, the stiff, unnerving smile. But around her the artist had drawn faint, swirling lines, like an aura of distortion, and at the bottom, scrawled in red ink that looked startlingly fresh against the aged paper. It feeds. My hand trembled, the paper rustling. It wasn't a sound from outside or the old house settling. It was faint, almost imperceptible, like a tune played on a distant, broken music box. My head snapped up. I strained my ears, my breathing shallow, nothing. I told myself it was my imagination, a phantom echo of the file's unsettling contents. I forced my gaze back to the page. More observations. Dates that corresponded with my periods of greatest distress as a child. Believes it understands. This is beyond observation. This is something else. The hum returned, louder this time. It wasn't musical. It was a single, sustained note, thin and piercing like a violin string stretched to its breaking point. It vibrated in the air around me, a physical presence. My teeth began to ache. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my free hand against my ear. It didn't help. The hum cut off abruptly. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Nothing moved. The room was exactly as it had been, ancient and still. But then, in the reflection of the dusty window pane, something shifted. A brief, almost imperceptible flicker, not outside, inside the room. I spun around, my chair scraping harshly on the wooden floor. My gaze swept across the stacks of files, the empty desk, the bare walls. No, nothing. I breathed a shaky sigh, trying to steady myself. My mind was playing tricks. The file, the memories, isolation, it was all getting to me. I was exhausted, paranoid. I turned back to the desk, the file still open before me. That's when I saw it. It was too dense, too defined. It was thin, impossibly so, and tapered at the top, like a crude, distorted silhouette of a small figure. My breath caught. I didn't turn my head fully, couldn't. I just watched it, my eyes wide and unblinking, tracking its subtle, almost imperceptible movement. It wasn't swaying, not exactly. It's more like it was breathing. My determination, usually a steadfast anchor, began to fray. This wasn't a hallucination. The hum, maybe, the file, absolutely real, but this felt like a direct intrusion. The hair on my nape prickled. I could feel its presence, a distinct weight in the warden's office, heavier than the dust and decay. I forced myself to turn, slowly, deliberately. For a moment it was gone. Then, as my eyes adjusted, I saw it again. A faint, almost transparent outline pressed flat but still there, like a stain that wouldn't wash away. No response. It feeds. What was it feeding on? And what exactly was my role in all of this? My ears rang, a dull throb that replaced the piercing hum. I must have fallen. The floorboards were cold against my cheek, grit pressing into my skin. My hand still cupped my ear, but the sound was gone, leaving only a phantom ache behind my teeth. My vision swam. A kaleidoscope of dust motes dancing in the dim light, filtering through the stained glass window at the end of the hall. I pushed myself up, my muscles protesting, a tremor running through my arms. The silence that followed the hum was almost worse, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound, even the creaks of the old house. I stumbled back to my studio, driven by a restless energy I couldn't name. The canvas on the easel seemed to pull at me, a blank expanse demanding to be filled. I squeezed tubes of paint onto my palette, the familiar scent of linseed oil and pigment a momentary comfort. But my hands didn't move with their usual deliberation. There was an urgency to their motions, a frenetic pace that felt alien. I started with broad, aggressive strokes, not planning, just letting the brushes drag across the surface. The initial image was abstract, a chaos of deep purples and bruised blues, like an internal bruise spreading across the canvas. But then, without conscious thought, forms began to emerge. Then eyes. I tried to pull back to paint over them to reclaim the composition, but my hand refused. It felt like a marionette's responding to a different will. Days blurred into nights. Sleep was a luxury I couldn't afford, my mind a churning vortex of half-formed images and the ghost of that piercing hum. My studio became a crucible. The air grew thick with the smell of turpentine and my own unwashed body. Empty coffee mugs piled up like monuments to my exhaustion. The figures in my new pieces were always distorted, their limbs elongated, their faces a grotesque parody of human emotion. A child's toy, rendered with a disturbing realism, would often be nestled in the foreground, its porcelain features chipped, its eyes too bright, too watchful. I saw Leela in every one of them. Not explicitly, not the doll herself, but her essence. I felt like a vessel, a conduit, my artistic skill hijacked by an unseen presence, pouring its own nightmares onto my canvases. My reflection in the window pane of the studio was gaunt, my eyes bloodshot, ringed with exhaustion. I barely recognized the man staring back. This wasn't creation, it was possession. I was losing myself in the paint, in the clay, watching my own nightmares take tangible form, fueled by a force that wasn't entirely my own. One evening, driven by a compulsion I couldn't resist, I found myself on the second floor, a part of the mansion I'd largely avoided. My gaze fell upon a section of wall, unadorned, painted the same faded cream as the rest, yet it felt different. A faint seam, almost imperceptible, ran vertically down the plaster. I ran my fingers along it, feeling a subtle unevenness. My heart gave a strange lurch. I pushed, then pulled. With a groan of ancient wood and a shower of dust, a narrow door swung inward. Beyond it lay a short, dark corridor leading to a single, small room. The air here was heavy still. This wasn't a bedroom nor a parlor. The room was sparse, functional, unlike anything else in the mansion. A single, heavy wooden desk dominated the space, its surface scarred and stained. Behind it stood a tall, narrow cabinet, its glass front opaque with grime. This was the warden's office. On the desk, neatly stacked, were several binders, their covers brittle with age, their corners curled. I reached for the top one, my fingers trembling slightly. The label, handwritten in faded ink, read, Subject, LA Case Files. I opened it. The first page was a photograph, grainy and yellowed, of a young girl no older than 7 or 8. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and haunted. Below the picture, a typewritten entry, Subject, LA admitted. The rest of the words were blurred, indecipherable, as if someone had tried to erase them. My breath hitched. The girl in the photo, with her delicate features and unsettling gaze, reminded me of. I flipped through more pages. These were the files that shouldn't exist. Some entries mentioned unusual attachments, unexplained phenomena, and behavioral anomalies. I saw dates scattered throughout the files, some reaching back decades, others surprisingly recent. Some of them even overlapped with the years of my own childhood. Years I had tried so desperately to forget. My eyes scanned a particular entry, a single line underlined multiple times. The doll exhibits an unnatural influence, particularly on sensitive individuals. Artifact. Leela, this wasn't just about my trauma. This was about something far older, far more sinister than I had ever dared to imagine. What kind of place was this? And who was the warden? What secrets did these forgotten files hold about Leela? And about my own family's twisted history with her? A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. Artifact. Leela. What secrets did these forgotten files hold about Leela and about me? My fingers, suddenly clumsy, traced the embossed lettering on the manila folder. The air in the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, felt heavy, thick with the scent of decaying paper and something else, something metallic and faintly acrid, like old blood mixed with dust. The single bare bulb hanging precariously from the ceiling cast a jaundiced glow on the stacks of documents, a chaotic graveyard of forgotten bureaucracy. Every surface was coated in a fine, gray film. The chair I'd dragged from a corner groaned under my weight, the springs complaining like ancient bones. I needed to move, to breathe, but a strange paralysis held me. It was the same feeling I'd had as a child, caught between the terrifying allure of Leela and the instinct to flee. Only now, there was no grandmother to snatch me away, no locked door to hide behind. I was alone with the truth, whatever it was. My gaze drifted back to the file marked Project Leela. The name seemed to hum with a low, malevolent energy, even scrawled in faded ink. I swallowed, the sound loud in the oppressive silence. My throat was dry, raspy. Every nerve ending in my body screamed at me to close the folder, to burn this entire room, to run back to the relative sanity of my studio. But a different, more powerful compulsion held me. This was it, the answer. With a trembling hand, I opened the file. The paper inside was brittle, yellowed, flaking at the edges. The first page was a faded photograph, a grainy black and white image of Leela. But this wasn't the Leela I knew, not exactly. The eyes, even in the poor light, seemed to bore into me, unnervingly lifelike, far more intense than any doll's. Her porcelain face had a faint, almost imperceptible crack running from her left temple down to her chin, a hairline fracture I'd never noticed on the doll upstairs. Beneath the photograph, a series of entries, handwritten in a precise, almost clinical script, detailed her acquisition. Subject designated Leela, acquired from a private collection, Vienna, 1938. Origin believed to be Eastern European, late 17th century. Apparent craftsmanship suggests esoteric purpose. Initial observations indicate unusual psychological impact on nearby individuals, particularly children, suggest containment protocols. My breath hitched. 17th century. My grandmother had always said Leela was an antique, a family heirloom, but never that old. An esoteric purpose. Psychological impact. This wasn't just a doll. This was something engineered for malevolence. The entries continued, detailing a series of escalating incidents. The assistant was subsequently removed, deemed compromised. My eyes darted across the page, searching for something, anything that connected this history to my history, and then I saw it. A series of records under containment breach, August 1987. My stomach lurched. That was the year. That was my year. The report detailed how Leela, despite being secured, had manifested in a private residence, specifically my grandmother's house. My grandmother, referred to only as Custodian A, was noted for her unusual resilience and deep, if reluctant, understanding of the artifact's nature. She hadn't just inherited Leela. She'd been a custodian, a guardian, perhaps even a jailer. I found a personal log tucked deeper into the file. Written in a familiar, elegant hand, my grandmother's hand, the words were more frantic, less formal. August 14th, 1987, it's here, I don't know how. The containment failed. Dean, my grandson, he's drawn to it just as I feared. I saw its influence. The way his eyes glazed over, the unnatural stillness. It tried to replace him, essence. I intervened. I broke its hold, but the cost was immense. I see the vulnerability. I must hide it again. I must protect him, even if it means burying myself with this terrible secret. The words blurred. Replace him. I was small, maybe 5 or 6, in my grandmother's sitting room. Leela sat on the armchair opposite me, her eyes unblinking. I remember a strange calm, a sense of profound peace washing over me. It wasn't the peace of a child's nap. It was the peace of surrender. I felt a pulling sensation, a gentle tugging at the very core of my being, as if something intangible was being stretched, thinned, ready to snap. Leela's porcelain face, usually serene, seemed to contort into a silent, gaping maw. Her painted lips stretched impossibly wide, revealing rows of tiny, needle-sharp teeth that weren't there a moment before. Her glass eyes, usually fixed and vacant, swirled with an infernal, hungry light. And then a scream, not mine, but my grandmother's. He was there. A whirlwind of frantic motion, tearing Leela from the chair, throwing her against the wall with a force I hadn't known she possessed. The crack, the hairline fracture on Leela's temple. It wasn't there in the photograph because my grandmother put it there, saving me. The memory hit me with the force of a physical blow. My breath caught in my chest, a ragged gasp. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold the brittle paper. Leela hadn't just scared me. He had tried to become me, and my grandmother had known, he had fought it. And then he had buried the truth, not just for herself, but for me. The warden's office, files that shouldn't exist, suddenly felt like the most dangerous place on earth. I was no longer just dealing with a doll or even a curse. I was entangled in a battle that had spanned centuries, a battle my grandmother had waged alone, and now it was mine. What kind of entity was this that could possess a doll and attempt to consume a child's very soul? And if my grandmother had merely contained it, not destroyed it, what was to stop Leela from finishing what she started? I remembered her eyes, not the painted glass, but something deeper, an unsettling warmth that shouldn't have been there, a flicker of awareness. She wasn't just a doll. Even then, a child of 5 or 6, I knew it. The memory, sharp and cold as a splinter, brought with it a suffocating weight. The air in the study thickened, pressing against my lungs. Leela, the real Leela, wasn't just an object. He was a presence, a hunger. Replace him, hollow him out. The words echoed, no longer just a fading scribble on old paper, but a command, a sinister directive aimed at me. I gripped the edge of the desk, gripped tight. My phone, I needed to call someone, anyone, the detective, a colleague, the number for the local authorities. Dead, completely dead. I'd charged it just last night. This wasn't an accident. Nothing in this house was an accident anymore. I bolted for the door, my heart racing a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Escape. That was the only thought. Get out. The study door, which I'd left ajar, was now firmly shut. The heavy oak felt solid, unyielding beneath my palm. I twisted the brass knob. It turned, but the door wouldn't budge. It was locked. I tried again, harder, rattling the handle. Nothing. Panic. Sharp and acrid, clawed at my throat. I spun around, my eyes darting across the familiar room. I ran to the window, tearing aside the velvet drapes. The latches, usually stiff, were now fused shut, unmovable. I pushed, pulled, even slammed my shoulder against the frame, but the old glass held firm. It was as if the very house was conspiring against me. A faint, high-pitched giggle echoed from the hallway, thin as a spider's silk, yet sharp enough to pierce the frantic thrumming in my ears. Leela, he was playing. I backed away from the window, my breath catching. I could feel the house itself shift, subtly, imperceptibly, like a living thing drawing itself up to its full menacing height. The floorboards beneath my feet groaned, not with the familiar creak of old wood, but with a deep, guttural sigh. I had to get out. If not through the study, then through the main entrance. I knew this house, every twist and turn. I'd spent years here as a child, years trying to forget it. I would find a way. I turned back to the door, a sudden desperate strength coursing through me. I slammed my fist against the oak panel once, twice. The wood vibrated, a low hum that seemed to resonate deep within my bones. Then with a soft click, the door swung inward. My breath hitched. It wasn't the study door. This was the door to the linen closet, a cramped, dusty space I hadn't opened in years, filled with moth-eaten sheets and the faint smell of lavender and decay. I stood in the middle of the hallway, bewildered. The study was gone. In its place, where the heavy oak door should have been, was a blank section of wall, indistinguishable from the rest of the wallpaper. My mind reeled. This wasn't possible. I knew this house. Every room, every passage. My reality was fragmenting, shattering into impossible pieces. The hallway stretched before me, longer than it should have been, the ornate wallpaper blurring into dizzying patterns. I stumbled forward, my legs feeling heavy, leaden. The air was thick with the scent of dust and something else something metallic and sweet, like old blood and roses. The temperature dropped again, so sharply that I could see my breath misting in the air. I kept moving, desperate to find the main stairs, the front door. I passed the grand parlor, the door ajar, revealing a glimpse of the shrouded furniture. But as I passed, I swore I saw a flicker of movement within, a small, still figure sitting upright on the sofa, its porcelain face turned towards me. I didn't stop. I couldn't. The hallway twisted unexpectedly. I found myself in a section of the house I didn't recognize, a long, narrow corridor with low ceilings and unpainted walls. The air here was stale, heavy, and carried the distinct smell of damp earth and something acrid, chemical. This wasn't part of the main house. It felt like an extension, a forgotten annex, perhaps even underground. A strange, insistent hum vibrated through the floor, drawing me closer. It felt wrong, utterly wrong, but a morbid curiosity, coupled with the desperate need to find anything that made sense, pulled me forward. The door creaked open further as I pushed it, revealing a small, cramped room. The air in here was even heavier, thicker with the smell of old paper and something else, something metallic and sharp. This was the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. The name echoed in my head, an unnerving certainty. A dusty wooden desk dominated the center of the room, piled high with yellowed folders and ledgers. On the far wall, metal filing cabinets stood like silent sentinels, their drawers half open, spilling more papers onto the grimy floor. A single, rickety chair sat before the desk. My eyes landed on a specific folder, placed almost deliberately on top of the stack. It was thicker than the others, its label faded but legible. Case file, Leela M., Incidents Manor Property. My hands trembled as I reached for it. This was it, the truth, the answers. Inside, neatly typed reports, handwritten notes, and grainy photographs lay waiting. The first page was a dated account detailing a series of unexplained occurrences in the manor, dating back decades. A faded, official-looking form, stamped restricted access, detailing a temporary guardianship arrangement. My grandmother's name was at the top, listed as the primary guardian. Below it, the name of a child, not just any child, my name, Dean, prognosis, unstable, recommendation, isolation, observation for replacement. Replacement. The word from the previous chapter, the one I'd dismissed as a phantom, now burned into my mind. I was the subject. I was unstable. They were observing me for replacement. A sudden, sharp crack echoed from behind me like dry bones snapping. The papers in my hands rustled, as if caught in a sudden, unseen draft. I froze, the file clutched to my chest, every nerve screaming. What did replacement mean, and who or what was watching me now? The darkness was absolute, thick and suffocating. It tasted of old dust and something metallic, like stale blood. My breath hitched, a small, choked sound in the sudden void. The crack, that dry snap, still vibrated in the air around me. It wasn't just a sound, it was a physical blow, a confirmation of the word that clung to my mind like a burr. Replacement. My heart hammered against my ribs, not a simple thrum, but a frantic, uneven beat, like a trapped bird beating its wings against a cage. My vision strained against the black, but there was nothing. My hands flew out, brushing against the rough plaster of the wall. Damp. The mansion was alive with a malevolent breath, exhaling around me. I pressed my back against the wall, trying to orient myself. Where was I? The hallway, the one leading to the sealed-off sections of the basement. A memory half-formed, a story untold. My grandmother had kept secrets not just from me but from the world, and Leela was at the heart of them. I had to move. Standing still was surrender. I shuffled forward, one cautious foot after another, my fingers dragging along the wall. The texture changed, from crumbling plaster to rough-hewn stone. Leela, her presence was a tangible shroud. My foot connected with something soft, yielding. A gasp escaped me. I froze, every nerve ending screaming. What was it? No, I knelt, my fingers trembling as I reached down. Fabric, old, brittle cloth, a discarded curtain. My hand brushed against a small, hard shape within the folds. I recoiled instantly, pulling my hand back as if burned. The shape felt too familiar, too perfectly sculpted. I pushed the thought away. Focus, Dean, the files, the truth, the way out. The stone wall gave way to a heavy, iron-bound door. I felt it before I saw it, the cold metal radiating through the gloom. A latch stiff with rust groaned under my touch. It wasn't locked, it was just forgotten. Pushing it open, the sound was a long, drawn-out shriek, echoing into the vast emptiness beyond. The sickly sweet scent intensified, making my stomach clench. I flicked it on. The light cut through the gloom, revealing a small, cramped room, walls lined with decaying wooden shelves. Every surface was thick with dust, a fine gray blanket over everything. The air was so still, it felt like it hadn't been disturbed in decades. In the center, a heavy oak desk, its surface scarred and stained, was piled high with yellowed ledgers and brittle papers. The smell here was potent, old paper, dust, and that pervasive, cloying sweetness. I beam swept across the shelves. Names, dates, strange symbols scrawled on spines. Not just records, but journals, personal entries. I saw my grandmother's looping script on one, then a hand I didn't recognize, older, more severe, generations. They had all been here watching, documenting. The replacement wasn't just about me. It was a cycle. I pulled down the oldest ledger I could find, its cover thick leather, cracked and flaking. The pages within were brittle, smelling of dried flowers and age. The script was spidery, almost illegible, but as I focused, words began to coalesce. This wasn't just a family record, it was a chronicle of the doll. Entry, October 1888. The hand was firm, masculine. She demands, always, the child of the house, her favored plaything, a vessel to hold the spark, the replacement. My breath hitched again. The spark, the replacement. It wasn't about me being replaced. It was about Leela replacing something within me, or using me to replace herself somewhere else. I flipped frantically through the pages, my fingers leaving smudges on the delicate paper. My heart raced, a drumbeat in my ears. I needed to understand, I needed a weapon. Entry, June 1903. A different hand, more frantic. She grows stronger with each cycle. The binding weakens, the spark flares, the sacrifice is not enough. The mirror, the true reflection. It repels her for a time, a brief respite. The mirror, a true reflection, repels her. This was it. A crack in her armor, not a physical weapon but something else. A vulnerability tied to her very nature. Leela the doll was a reflection, a twisted imitation of life. What would repel a reflection? Truth, reality, a mirror. My own art, perhaps, which was all about revealing truth, however distorted. A low hum began to vibrate through the floorboards. It started as a subtle thrum, then grew, a deep, resonant sound that seemed to emanate from the very foundations of the mansion. The air in the warden's office grew heavy, pressing in on me. The light from my flashlight flickered, struggling against an unseen force. The hum intensified, filling my head, making my teeth ache. I knew he was coming. She knew I had found her secrets. It shimmered, wavered, then solidified. It was a child's voice, sweet and innocent, yet laced with an ancient, predatory hunger. But it changes nothing, Dean. The spark is almost mine. The vessel is ready. My hands tightened on the ledger. My resolve, which had been a flickering flame, now burned with a fierce, desperate heat. I know what I am. A tiny, high-pitched giggle echoed around me, a sound that scraped against my nerves. I closed my eyes, picturing my easel, my paints, the canvases where I had poured out my fractured reality. My art, my truth. It was a weapon. The giggle died, replaced by a low, guttural growl that resonated through the floor. It was a sound of ancient fury, of something denied. A true reflection, I repeated, remembering the words from the ledger. My gaze swept the room, searching. No mirror, not here, but I had something else. My eyes landed on a tarnished silver picture frame on the desk, holding a faded photograph of my grandmother. It wasn't a mirror, but it was a surface capable of reflecting. It was a start. I snatched the frame, its cold metal biting into my fingers. The air crackled, my vision blurred. My head swam, the world tilted. My own reality. A sudden, sharp crack, louder than the first, split the air directly in front of me. The air solidified, then shattered like invisible glass. Something was breaking. Was it her, or was it me? My legs buckled. I fell to my knees, gasping for air, the silver frame clutched tight in my hand. But the room was not empty. I felt a presence, still lingering, still watching, still waiting. What had I done? Was it enough? Had I wounded her or merely provoked her? The hum intensified, a promise of return, a lingering threat. And then from the deepest corners of the room, a faint, almost imperceptible scratching began. A tiny, insistent sound, like nails on wood, coming from within the shelves, from within the very files I had just disturbed. What was trapped inside them? The mirror. Heavy in my trembling hand, felt cold, a slab of obsidian against my palm. The guttural growl vibrated through the floorboards, through my bones, a sound that should not exist. It was ancient, furious, and filled with a raw hunger I could almost taste in the stale air. My gaze, frantic, swept the room, searching for What? The shadow, a churning void at the edge of my vision, pulsed. The ledger's cryptic phrase clawed at my mind. What was I reflecting? Myself? Leela? Or something deeper, something she couldn't bear to see? My arm ached, every muscle screaming in protest, but I held it steady. It hissed, a sound like dry leaves skittering across frozen ground, but laced with something sharp and predatory. The doll, Leela, remained motionless on the mantel, her painted smile fixed, but I felt her presence, a tightening coil of pure hatred. The mirror seemed to drink in the surrounding gloom, not reflecting it, but absorbing it, showing only a pure, unblemished surface that pulsed with an inner soft light. It was showing the lie. The growl intensified, a sound of pure agony mixed with rage. The room temperature plummeted. My breath plumed in front of me. I could feel icy tendrils reaching for my face, desperate thrashing. It tried to push back, a palpable force pressing against my arm, trying to shatter my resolve, to make me drop the glass. My fingers cramped around the frame. My knuckles were white. This wasn't just a battle of wills. It was a battle against something that had fed on my family for generations. It was a sound of absolute, unadulterated pain, of something being torn from its anchor. It pulsed with a dying light, a grotesque internal flicker, before contracting violently, pulling back into itself with a sound like tearing fabric. It didn't vanish, not entirely, but it receded, shrinking, coalescing into a dense, inert knot behind the doll. The air lightened, though it still tasted metallic. Leela remained on the mantel, unmoving, but the malevolent charge in the air was gone. The immediate threat was dealt with, or so it seemed. But what had truly happened? Had I banished it or merely driven it deeper? I stood there, mirror still in hand, my heart racing like a trapped bird. My entire body trembled, a deep, uncontrollable tremor that started in my knees and shook through my jaw. My head throbbed, empty, a grand, decaying monument to a forgotten pain. I dropped the mirror onto the dusty floorboards. It didn't shatter. I stumbled out of the study, past the portraits whose eyes no longer seemed to follow me, down the grand staircase that no longer groaned with unseen weight. I didn't look back. I knew I couldn't stay. I knew I couldn't return. But where did I go from here? Days blurred into a haze of travel and restless sleep. I needed answers that the mansion could not provide. I remembered a faint, almost erased notation in one of my grandmother's journals, a name, an address scribbled years ago, long before the mansion became mine. A place that sounded official, yet deeply secret. It led me to a forgotten wing of what used to be a city archive, nestled between crumbling brick buildings slated for demolition. The air inside was thick with dust and the scent of decaying paper. A narrow, unlit corridor, choked with forgotten furniture, led to a heavy, unmarked door. The lock was old, rusted, but yielded to the key I'd found tucked inside the ledger's binding. I stepped into the warden's office, files that shouldn't exist. Dust motes danced in the weak shafts of light. Steel filing cabinets, stacked haphazardly, lined the walls. On a heavy wooden desk sat a single leather-bound register, its pages brittle and yellowed. My fingers traced the faded ink, the neat, almost elegant script. It was a record, a ledger of sorts, detailing a series of transfers, not of money or property, but of custody, names, dates, and cryptic notes. My family name appeared repeatedly. I pulled open the drawer marked Miscellaneous Restricted. Inside, nestled amongst brittle newspaper clippings and official-looking documents, were folders. Their tabs were handwritten, not typed. The Weaver lineage, anomalous occurrences doll, custodial transfers specimen 7. My hands trembled as I opened the folder marked Anomalous Occurrences doll. The first document was a typewritten report, dated nearly a century ago, detailing a series of unexplained psychological disturbances within a specific family. My family. It spoke of a parasitic entity, not a doll, but a being that inhabited a vessel, feeding on the unfiltered emotional output of those with a particular artistic sensitivity, a trait, it seemed, that ran through my bloodline. Leela wasn't just a cursed object. He was a sentient parasite, drawn to my family's unique vulnerability, growing stronger with each generation she touched. The true reflection wasn't just about her ugliness, but about her fundamental truth. He was a mirror held up to my family's own inherited trauma, twisting it, amplifying it, becoming it. She wasn't just a doll. I stared at the faded ink, the clinical language doing little to soften the horrifying truth. It wasn't just my grandmother, or my mother, or even me. This had been going on for generations, a silent, insidious infection passed down through the blood, chosen for a specific artistic sensitivity that Leela craved. It had been in us, a part of our very essence, waiting for the right moment to manifest. I closed the folder, the rustle of paper loud in the quiet room. The curse wasn't just on my family, it was woven into my family. Could it ever truly be gone, or was it simply dormant, waiting for another generation, another artist, to awaken it once more? I stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of secrets, knowing that the real horror wasn't in the mansion, but in the blood that flowed through my own veins. What did that make me, and what would it make of my future?